manifests in 4 broad areas. Again, let us look, we can also take our strategic plan based on some of this. One is good board practices. In other words, you have a well-structured board with the appropriate composition, and you have a well-structured board. You have the mix of skills that are required for the different oversight functions. I've not gone into that. I won't believe that you know by now what the roles of the board is. But the key one is oversight. The second one, of course, that relates to this, and remember I said it's about relationships between stakeholders. It's clarity of roles and responsibilities for the members of the board. And more importantly, their understanding of those roles and responsibilities. In this country, I'm sorry to say, but we have so many public boards that people are appointed just because I know the minister, somebody in government, and they go in there and not understand what their roles and responsibilities are. Therefore, they just become paid weights to carry on the board. But some people seek to be on boards also because of what boards are supposed to guard against, conflict of interest. If I'm on that board, I'm able to get my companies to access contracts. So that's the second. The third aspect of what good board practices is appropriate procedures in place to ensure that the board performs efficiently. Boards conduct their business through meetings, and so there should be clear procedures on how the board conducts its business. Issues of quorum, issues of how regular these meetings are held, how agreed to actions are followed through. Board evaluation is another important aspect of good board practices. And then I must say that this is an area, based on my experience, that is hardly executed by many boards. It's important that the performance of the board is evaluated. Evaluated on the basis of what their roles and responsibilities are. So that becomes particularly, that's one of the other areas that needs to be addressed. Then board remuneration. That is quite a controversial subject.
Hello.
How are you?
Fine, how are you?
Nice.
Yeah. Long time.
Some other institutions remunerate their boards quite decently, if I may say, and others do not. Actually, the vast majority of particular organizations that are still coming up work through voluntary boards, which also has its advantages and to some extent also disadvantages. But that is also another reason why some people want to be on board. Some people will fight to be on the board of NSSF. In countries, some people will fight to be on the board of Bank of Uganda, and so on and so forth. Because as a board member, you'll have a car assigned to you with fuel and a certain amount of money every month. So that's a controversial area, but it's important within the means. And I think if you have, I'm told you have that common thing here, isn't it? Within your means, how best can you incentivize your board? And then lastly, operation of the board by way of board committees. Particularly important. That's a good board practice. Does the board have the key? I know that yesterday during one of our meetings, we were actually discussing the issue of one of the committee report. That is actually, so those are the broad, if I may say, tenets. So we need to evaluate our boards, whether our boards have or mirror, or at least the best of this one.
You have cock?
The second aspect of what is considered to be good corporate governance is the control environment. Not control in the sense that we know it, but control in the sense of managing risks. That the institution is likely come face to face with. Is there a risk management framework in place that allows the firm to identify, assess, and mitigate more important risks? Many times that's why you see in the strategic plans that we prepare, we have risk.
Okay.
Risk mitigation. Because institutions will inherently face or come face to face with certain risks. So, framework to address that. And that brings me a key feature of boards of good corporate governance or institutions is an independent audit policy, where possible, and to a size that reflects how big or the stage of growth of that particular application. And I underline independent committee that is not going to be subject to being manipulated in order to keep silent on what they identified as key risks that could undermine the reputation. All these, remember, impact on your reputation. An incompetent board directly impacts on your reputation as an institution. Say, that is just a sitting black board. Doesn't do anything. Management does everything. Yeah? So that's the second aspect. Internal control procedures, again, boards usually will come up with policies that are then passed on to management to ensure that internal control is sufficient and that management information systems that need to support these are also put in place. Related to that, of course, is the presence of an internal auditor to support the audit function in an institution or a firm. Presence of an internal auditor is meant to strengthen compliance. If you can afford it as an institution, that's one of those tenets, one of those areas of corporate governance that is considered to be good. And then there are, of course, issues to do with financial statements and their disclosure. That is also particularly important. If you recall, I think the global financial crisis of 2007, you know that it went with so many banks in the US and so many companies, CEOs were sacked. Why? It's because CEOs were, what was better word, cooking financial statements. They were presenting rosy financial statements to their boards and stakeholders when indeed the situation was far from that. So many companies collapsed as a result. Because the moment the public realized that they had been deceived for all this time, shareholders pulled out, no investor was interested in, clients walked the next available. So it's important that these statements are published because they also strongly contribute to institutional integrity, credibility, accountability, and transparency, which ultimately impact on your reputation as an institution. The third aspect of what I'm going to talk about is, of course, the transparent disclosure. Institutions need to disclose information, both financial and non-financial. I already talked about that. It's key stakeholders, including shareholders. In the case of businesses, shareholders. As a governing council, we have to always report to our bosses, because we are appointed to act on behalf of the diocese, isn't it? So we have to ensure that we disclose information that we get from management. Now I'll talk about the relationship between board and management, because that's one of the key areas of challenges. Financial statements should be prepared according to the national standards. They should be audited by an independent external auditor. Important, because those are the things that strengthen not only transparency, but also credibility of these statements. And then the last aspect of what I will talk about is good corporate citizenship. I think I again remember that the Vice Chancellor mentioned the goal that relates with community, getting back to community, goal of the university. It's important that firms, organizations demonstrate good corporate citizenship. In other words, being able to first and foremost identify who your key stakeholders are, map out their needs, engage with them to see how else, beyond the services and goods you provide, you can be able to support the stakeholders, particularly communities, addressing issues that are there. Organizations need to be aware of minority rights, others, because those are all issues that come up in your environment. And I think in these countries, for the moment, I think it's only the telecommunication sector. I'm not sure about the banking, but I need to cross check. I think it's only the telecommunication sector through the Uganda Communications Commission that requires all communication or all telecommunication companies actually devote a certain amount of money towards corporate social responsibility. Good corporate citizenship is, in a nutshell, what people talk of in relation to corporate social responsibility. The risk of losing time, I will skip, but I'll just talk broadly, perhaps, about again some of the generally accepted standards of best practice in good corporate governance. And I'm going to talk about them more from the point of view of the challenges that we tend to see. One, the role and composition of boards or governing bodies. This is an area where that is very critical. As I said earlier on, if you do not appoint the right people to your board, the quality of oversight, the quality of policies that they are supposed to develop and pass on to management for the smooth running of the organization will be. That's an aspect that many times we need to pay significant attention. It constitutes a key challenge in corporate governance in this country. In the media now, we all are hearing about Uganda Airlines. Now ask yourself how that board was composed. And then ask yourself whether the governance issues, the management issues we are seeing in there are established. So starting with the appointment of board members is very critical. you appoint the wrong people, you're going to get the wrong advice. And so we need to pay attention to that. You get the wrong people, the organization will not survive the time. You'll be swept under because they will not be able to provide you quality. Secondly, the clarity of their role. We've already talked about that. Well, I won't go how much. But in selecting the board, maybe let me talk about it. And this has been an area where at times institutions are falling very hard. And I want to give an example of our typical business boards. There's what we call executive boards and then the non-executive boards. I'm hoping that again you will cover this as part of your lecture series. But in a nutshell, executive boards are boards that end up having an active engagement in the management of the affairs of a firm or an organization. Non-executive directors are people who are usually drawn from different fields. They have no direct relationship with that institution, but come in purely on the basis of the strength of their knowledge, skills, competence to provide. So we need to think about that mix. It's particularly important to have that right mix in board, because that also has direct implication on quality of that. Okay. If you get people that are purely part of management, they are not, chances are very high that they are going to continue thinking the same way. Huh? They are not going to bring on board new ideas, new experiences from elsewhere. So they need to figure out how best we can balance these boards and membership to these boards, that you're able to get good boards in place. And the international, I mean, the general accepted whatever is that at least 1/3 of the board members should be, at the very least, 1/3 should be non-executive. People that are drawn from completely outside the institution. So think about your small family business. There's no harm. Many times we are very cagey. Why should I bring on board someone to do this business of ours? If they are going to add value, if they are bringing knowledge, skills, experience that will guide your business survive forward. Now, let me say on this note, which is, as I said earlier, it's something I've taken a keen interest in, because I am also looking at my own self. If you look back at this country right now, I mean, at most businesses in this country, many of them do not go beyond first generation of owners. I've started the business with my wife and my children. When I die, when my wife dies, the business comes to an end. In Europe, we have organizations that have 100 years existence. I've been talking to my friends in the farming community. I have an active interest in agriculture. And they tell us, no, our family, whatever, have a history, 40, 50 years, 100 years. Most times, it's because we have not addressed that aspect of corporate governance. Brought on board people that were very focused with the purpose for which the business exists, and continue to render advice beyond your existence. I want to throw that back to you, since you're going into the field. Think about your business. Yes, the issues of remuneration may worry you, but like I said, work within your means. Voluntary membership to boards also works. When you grow, then you can always, because if they are rendering you good quality advice that allows your business to grow, why shouldn't you take on board those individuals. So that's something that I want us to do. And the same applies. Let me just give another example of the non-state sector, NGOs. Charles found this NGO, is the chairman and the executive director of the NGO. For the last 15 years, it's the same person. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, funders have withdrawn, isn't it? They will tell you, founder syndrome is due. That's the corporate governance issue. So don't hesitate to bring on board, you know. And that's why boards have tenure, isn't it? Boards have tenure because you serve for a purpose, allow you to replenish, bring on board new ideas. Board oversight and management performance is another aspect. We talked briefly about that. That's the issue of the risk management, internal control, for standards, human resource and succession planning, all those issues around performance, the management performance. That's another aspect of a good practice, or generally recognized good practice. Decision making is another key one. Because decision making needs to be executed within an environment of integrity and transparency. Decisions need to be open, it needs to be ethical. You have a board that does not take into some consideration some of these decisions. These decisions will ultimately impact on your reputation. So board members must have access. And that brings me to the issue of the relationship between board members and management, which at times is not very good. For board members to make good decisions, they need information. Quality information, reliable information. So if they get the wrong information, it's very unlikely that they will give good or make good decisions. Shareholder relations and stakeholder rights is another aspect of a good practice. Risk management, we talked a lot about that and internal control, so allow me to speak to that. Now, allow me very quickly as I try to summarize my presentation. Now, pay attention just briefly to some of the key issues in corporate governance for public institutions. For those of you who work with districts, central government, and the others, these are some of the constants that you need to have. Public boards are largely, and I already mentioned earlier on, constrained by legal issues around their legal and operational autonomy. You have been appointed by politicians who at times want you to compromise decisions you make in order to suit their political interests. And yet they do not serve the best interest of the organization. Give an example again. Look at the Uganda Airlines. Is another example I want. I'm sorry I've used that because that's a very common. You heard about the CEO's recruitment. It's very irregular. Who recruits senior management or top management? Did the board? How did the board recruit a person who has not even called the transfer? On what basis were they able to do some of these background checks? If they had bothered to check, they would probably have realized that she abandoned the master's program at the point of writing a research. Now, are those the kind of people you want to have at the helm of an institution? What credibility does it give you? Now, that stems from purely the issues of autonomy or independence of boards. So that's an issue that we must address. Those of us that are in public institutions, if you appoint a board, let them be independent. Allow them to perform their oversight roles, and that way they will be able to contribute positively to performance of that organization, whether it's a state-owned enterprise or. The second aspect is that, particularly for state-owned enterprises, there needs to be a shift from the perception of the state understanding that we are now an owner. Get together. The state, the perceptions of the state, many times, as we know, is, it exists to, promote well-being and so on and so forth. But in business, if you're growing more money, contribute to non-income generating or revenue generating activity, then you're definitely going to end up a loss. So we need to begin to shift away from that and begin to realize that we need to wear the business outfit. How do things happen in the private sector? Third one, of course, is issues around disclosure and transparency, where again there have been lots of challenges, particularly public boards. If you're going to operate and guide your institutions to success, then you need to address, you need to ensure that there's a clear statement of the objectives of that organization and demonstrate your commitment to realizing those. Ownership and voting structure of the organization needs to be clearly put forward. And then any other considerations that relate to that. Rest of us, again, like I said, I talked about the non-listed company. Again, we are on the non-executive directors. We need to be very clear about shareholding structure. We need to be clear on where we are, what stage of growth, and what are the implications for us in terms of embracing some of these broad tenets. Now, allow me therefore, on the basis of corporate governance and fund performance, I'm going to look again at these in terms of those good practices or generally accepted principles that have been highlighted. Board composition and size. There is no agreement on how big or how small the board should be. There are so many arguments for big board, there are so many arguments for small. And I think based on where the organization stands in its growth, you can decide whether to have a small board. But studies have shown that the size of a board negatively impacts the firm on the performance of this subject for so many by different researchers, these are published. The second aspect is board independence, which we have talked about. First, starting with the right mix of executive and non-executive directors, and then ensuring that this board is able to perform their roles and responsibilities with the minimum of which they need. Again, reflecting on some of the studies, based on some of the examples I provided for, the existence of non-executive directors, those that are not directed, related to the entity has a positive relationship. So what am I saying? Or what do the studies point us to that we need to bring on board non-executive directors? People that we bring on board on the basis of their skills, knowledge, experiences, add value for our boards. Another aspect which I had not mentioned earlier on, which we see in some boards, is what they call CEO duality. And we see it a lot in many corporations or companies in the United States, chairman and CEO. That's what it means. And many of our private businesses actually know chairman and CEO. That duality, that taking on two responsibility by one individual, has been argued to be good, but it's also bad in some instances. I think it's in this country, probably the organization that I know that has that has been a subject of a lot of scrutiny is the Bank of Uganda. We all know that the governor of the central bank is a board. And I think you can see how powerful the government is. That's why we don't have a governor. Maybe that explains why we don't have a governor now, because you don't want to put someone who is too powerful, and therefore becomes difficult to, to run around it. Now again, based on reflection from different studies, the separation of these responsibilities, CEO and chairman, has a positive relationship with the growth of an organization. And I think the University of the Secretary is doing that. The chairperson of the governing council is not the vice chancellor. The other aspect is, of course, board and staff skills and levels. That's also very important. Essentially, the competence. Bring on board competent people that has, and again, it's been shown studies, he has a positive relationship on the performance of the organization. Because you've brought on board somebody that understands very well issues of human resource management, he or she will give you quality advice. We ensure that the policies are watertight. We bring on board someone that understands audit, and a professional auditor, and I think we all know, one of those requirements, I think, in the Public Financial Act, that all boards should now have an auditor. If you don't have, then, but you can always ensure you bring it. So this, again, this can come in as non-executive directors, and I know that formed part of our discussions. One of our things. So that tends to have a positive relationship, because then you will have good quality advice. How long top management of the CEO stays in an institution is also a corporate governance issue. And again, there are so many arguments, longer term, shorter term. But for the moment, from the most recent studies, it seems to suggest, or it suggests that longer serving CEOs tend to commit more time to their institutions because they are not worried about being kicked out more. And as such, their performance, their stay in the institution will have a positive relationship on the organization. Their stay enhances performance of the organization. There are arguments against that, but the key thing here lies around job security. The more secure you are to your job, the more you come up with new ideas, because you're not worried about starting something and leaving it halfway. Audit committee, another very important aspects of corporate governance. Again, as I've said earlier on, the audit committee, first of all, the size of the audit committee and composition has a positive contribution towards the performance of an organization. And it's even better when you have membership to the audit committee as non-executive. You're bringing in people from outside the organization. They are not part of the board. You know? Because what we've seen in many boards is that when we are constituting committees, we constitute on the basis of the existing membership of the board. Okay. Then the last, just allow me to talk about two more, and then I sum this up. Board management and relationship is another very important one. I've said this before. There are situations where the relationship between board and management has not been very good, where management does not perceive the board to be, a friendly organ. Such issues of disclosing information become a challenge. So a good relationship between management and board definitely has a positive relationship on performance of the firm, notwithstanding issues of independence. Conflict of interest, again, as we know, we have a board comprised of people that are just looking at how they can aim from being in that organization, performance of that organization will definitely be negatively affected. So in conclusion, having said that, it's my hope that this, tool I've taken you on the subject of corporate governance and why it's important. Performance of your organization, whether it's a business. I hope that this will provide you additional insights as you go back to your organizations to reflect on where you're getting it right, perhaps where you need to. I'm hoping that as you embark on this journey, now armed with qualifications as a strategic manager and leader, that your organization will begin to feel a sense of why boards can actually make a difference. Thank you very much.
I can stand here. Thanks, Charles, for this very elaborate, very clear presentations. And we have gone slightly beyond the time, but it's okay. Chairman, at least this question allowed because I thought this was very good for our students as they finish. Corporate governance is a key thing, and it is the most important things for the success of any organization, as you just explained. Because an organization which doesn't have very good corporate governance essentially collapses and becomes chaotic. So I thought it was important. A few extra minutes would do very badly for us. Now, we may not have a long time to respond, but nevertheless, I think it's still important. Let us, I know there are people who are online and they want to start presentation, but please bear with us a little bit and let us give some 5 minutes or so for response before we move to the next one. We have response from those online and response from them. And as I said, I appeal to you, if you want to ask a question, please be precise and ask your questions. And if you want to make a comment, don't make a speech, but just make a brief and clear comment. 2 minutes or even less, you can make all your points. And don't give us a long example to want to place some several years ago. It's okay. And we shall have it during break and discuss Mr. Charles. Thank you. Anybody here? Yes.
Maybe it's not a question, just done Charles. So I need the board myself. About the intention and the clarity.
Very good. Very good. That's an appreciation. Next. Okay. Very good question. Gender consideration to inform the board. That's very good. You will respond. Next.
Yeah, thank you so much. I don't know the reason why the family exists. One of them was non-profit medical organization. How can we show more than
Okay.
part of the purpose?
It's a non-profit organization. It will promote like what we mean. Okay. Thank you. Any question coming up from Secretariat, those who are online?
Yes, there's somebody, Mr. Patrick Kumamon is online. Patrick, please go on.
Mr. Lamto, I'm very sorry to defy the guidelines you have given. I have to put this question to Charles based on a background because I am not only a victim, but I reel with a lot of pain from my ongoing experiences in governance at the board level. Charles, I thank you for this very elaborate presentation on practical issues of corporate governance. We still live with the pains of the agency principle dilemma. Sometimes some of us are held hostage by the CEO, by the managing director. When you look at the typical traditional timetable of the board, it is not that adequate to deal with depth of issues in the organization. You are doing an oversight role, but you have got a veil between you and issues of transparency at the level of management. And the CEO is an inevitable and indispensable link. Are there any trade-offs, Charles, that you can advise? Sometimes our appointing authorities also enslave us to their dictates. What should corporate governance do? We cannot bend what is right, but if the right things are being violated every time, what innovations do we have in contemporary corporate governance if it should stick with oversight role? And I say this is the background of concerns that some managers, some directors at the board are too intrusive. They're delving too deep into what they should not be doing. But yet circumstances necessitate a level of depth of inquiry on critical issues of an institution. These days, Charles, we have got even audit reports that are not right. Internal auditors are not able to function independently and report to the board. Are there trade-offs? What advice do you give to realities of this nature, Charles? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Charles has picked up all the questions. Now let's move on. There was someone who wanted to say before we ask Charles to go and yes, very quickly so that Charles can come and respond. This is very important. Yes.
One is thanks so much, Charles. And then two, it's been very much an eye-opener to some of us because we've actually been looking brought forward here. We're managing also some small institutions or businesses around, and we've been doing that in kind of blackout. But this to me is not so good. And my only issue of concern, which Charles has actually addressed, is that we want to manage this within our means. But the kind of people are actually the ones who make according to his presentation. But at the same time, he's also telling us to manage within our meetings. And this is very, very cool. Of course, he has really, like for me, he has really shown to me that the one I want is him. But I cannot afford him. I'm lost.
Very good. It's not to respond, but it's not control parents. Okay. Yes, maybe the last one, I think. Sorry, I
Thank you
said
so
the
much
last.
for the presentation. I have two questions. One, is the size of the board in respect to performance. I didn't get that right. Whether it negatively impacts on and what is the connection between the two. Then number two is about the continuity in terms of terms of the board members. How do you continue in case the terms are short or long, given the experience that they have, and how will that impact on the decisions that are made thereafter? And the third one was, in terms of auditing, how is the auditors independent and they are getting the information that they are providing to them?
Okay, so that's good. Those questions Charles will answer, and when the board one or you have continuity, you going on, you coming in. He's going to answer all those questions. Charles, thank you very much.
There's a question that came in the
from
Online
questions, yes.
Moses, the Jew is asking that integrity seems one of the values that is inherent in us and rarely none. So how can boards ensure that integrity is upheld in all times by board managers and other staff? Hence this recipe for corruption.
Good, integrity. That's one of the questions, yes. Any more on the online?
No, that's it for now. That's it for now.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, again, thank you very much. I take the positive comments. I appreciate them. Integrity, yes. How can we do that? And I think integrity has also been touched in part by Mr. Address issues of integrity through policy. And one of the most common policies that you find in institutions is what we call the code of conduct. That's an instrument that boards use to regulate the conduct of, first and foremost, its board members. For the board members, they usually what we call a board charter that tells you where you start, where you stop, and so on and so forth. But for management and staff, that often is put in what we call the code of conduct. But there is no harm, the board can also have its own code of conduct. But I do agree again, as I was touching on, I think the issue is to get the right people. And what do we mean by the right people? We mean that people, one, with the right knowledge, skills. Two, people with the right character of integrity. Three, people with the right attitude. Now that takes me to the question of who appoints the CEO. To address the issues of a CEO who is too powerful and doesn't listen. Contemporary practice and practice, particularly in the developed world, shows that the board appoints the CEO and therefore fire the CEO. Now, when you have that, then it is actually possible for you to be able to control, for lack of a better word, but to work better with the CEO, because they end with clear terms and expectations. If he or she does not perform, he will see the exit. So that would be, and that is actually an issue. One of the challenges to corporate governance: who appoints the CEO, or where should the board start and stop? What we have seen is that where the board appoints the CEO and allows the CEO to appoint the rest of the management team, things are oftentimes going well. Because the challenge again, which we have seen, is where the board also appoints the rest of top management, then there tends to be a challenge of progressing. You know, the notion of we have all been appointed by the same board, so who did you? I will not mention, I see it a lot in public institutions. Where someone says, I was appointed by the president, you are also appointed by the president, just like you, who was appointed by the president, so you cannot push me. That's unfortunate. So my take on this would be the board should appoint the CEO and allow the CEO to appoint this, but should have the power. And that is all should be captured in the roles, responsibilities of the board. To fire the CEO. And independence, as I've said again, is really something that I don't know how best we can enforce it. Like Patrick, I'm not very sure I have the best. But I think if we look at the purpose for which our institutions exist, why we have established that business and where we want that business to go, and we fully understand the importance of a board providing oversight and quality oversight, then we should be able to allow boards to be fair. Allow them to report within a clear framework back to the annual general meeting of shareholders on what they have been able to do during the year, but leave them to execute their functions. And so that again will touch on issues again of independence of external auditors and so on and so forth. And that's why an audit committee, you know, as we say, you know, you expect an independent external auditor. When you have a very competent audit committee, even when an external auditor would want to say, like my friend used to say, play monkey games, that audit committee of the board, which scrutinizes that report, will most likely find issues. Therefore, that becomes a decently good check. Now, my brother, okay, issues of gender, again, some jurisdictions or legislations have said we provide for 1/3 of the board members to be ladies. I don't have a particular preference on this. But at times you also go by contemporary demands. Are we together? That you might want to ensure that one of the board members with the right skills too is a lady. So that when you come to a given development partner or a bank that has that as a requirement, or financiers that want to see that as a requirement, then you make compliance. But I wouldn't say that you must have 30% of the members report it. If you can match, the better. And we have also seen at times that our mothers, the ladies, are much more, I mean, integrity more dearly than some of us. So I think it would be a good practice. Not for profit, I think I mentioned that in a sense. That's why I said at the start of my presentation that I'm not only looking at farm, but I'm also looking at it. Because organizations exist for social and other purposes. But they also, for them to be successful, corporate governance, so boards play a key role in doing that. Yes, there is a big challenge, let's say that, of board material in this country. I should have said. You have seen, and it's not surprising, that for the big corporations in Kampala, you find the same case with 3-4 boards. Because they understand that this person is board material. The big shortage of board material in this country. They say people are just appointed because you are a relative, or I want to use you to as a channel for my conflict of interest. That's definitely an issue, but it also has the use of counts on 3, 4, 5 boards also impacts on how effective that is. That's the challenge. But on a positive note, the Institute of Data, an organization, the Institute of Corporate Governance of Uganda, is moving in that direction. The process of legislating corporate governance field was initiated, but stagnated a bit, but it's expected that in the future, corporate governance professionals, a board member, will have to be a member of the Institute of Corporate Governance in Uganda. Because through that institute, then capacity building for members and preparing them to be board quality material. Size of board, yes. Like I said, large or small may be good, may not be bad. But the general framework, I mean, in analyzing all this, it's considered that that is, negatively affects. When you have a very big board, most likely costs will come. Most likely decisions will be slow to make. When you have a very small board again, you may not have all the skills in there. So that's why we say it negatively affects the performance of an organization. Thank you very much. I think I have board tenure continuity again. What happens usually, and we've seen this, is that you will always retain a few members from the previous board or the new board for purposes of continuity. Keep the institutional vision and the institutional whatever going. So that's something that again that's why at times the tenure of boards also becomes a bit flexible. I mean, in all this, I forgot to say that, but one of the things about corporate governance is that there should be flexibility. Flexibility to respond to the changing context of the environment. Thank you very much. Other question?
Yeah.
I think this person meant in the case where there's CEO and chairman. So does CEO count himself in that case?
I gave you the example of Bank of Uganda. If the board is the one who is supposed to hire and the board is supposed to fire, and I'm the chairman of the board, who's going to fire? That's basically what it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you for everybody. I think I am done my session and I have to vacate this place. It was personal.
Well, thank you very much. I may need to consult with the session chairs whether it may be helpful to have a health break, about 10 minutes before we can resume the second. Again, request Professor Lecheng if that is possible.
Because if you can give us a few minutes to stretch, will be very good. We help out to use more.
Well, Patrick, you're online, and we were suggesting that we could give a health break of about 10 minutes. I don't know if that would be okay with you.
That's okay, Mr. Tim.
All right, thank you.
All right.
So it's 10 minutes. We resume at 11:40. 11:40. Thank you. This one has it. We could just click it. Also, I could still use it. Then they continue. Does it go to the So the
All right. And we have people. Robinson. Yeah. Pardon? Yes. I am not receiving sounds, but the screen is very clear. Will the sound come soon? Mm-hmm. Mute. I have done that. Okay. Do I proceed? A very good afternoon to everyone, and welcome back from the break. I would like to start by expressing my gratitude to the leadership and the organizers of this inaugural public lecture and immersion program for postgraduate students. I remain ever indebted to University of the Sacred Heart and what it stands for. I am pleased to speak on a subject and specifically a topic that is very passionate to my professional sphere, but also a subject that for me is a hands-on, it's an experiential encounter that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. I exude a lot of passion in the areas of financial development and development finance, and it represents a very significant component of the portfolio of the consulting services that I do. I would like to thank, in a very special way, the outgoing presenters for setting the stage for this topic that was allocated to me. This topic, investment financing and financial development strategies for the fourth and fifth industrial revolution, is one that I would like to address to this audience within a context, but also within a conundrum that derives from that context. Let us deal with the jargon. I acknowledge the very articulate manner in which the first presenter, the Vice Chancellor, disentangled the notion of the Industrial Revolution, the fourth and fifth Industrial Revolution. But I would like to specifically anchor this in the rings of financial development. Over the years, evolutions in the market in the areas of investments have presented unique attributes, and these attributes have presented a challenge that has prompted a response from financial markets and the financial sector in a manner that is responsive to the uniqueness of the financial needs for investment. Now, this uniqueness of the market has evolved over time, and each generation of development with its unique demands for financial services and institutions can last for quite a long time. So as each phase of this landscape has evolved and gone, development practitioners have crafted a terminology with which to recognize that. And I think it is in the background of this that our intelligent authors formulated this topic that is allocated to me to address the fourth and fifth industrial revolution. In this case, therefore, I would like to anchor this topic to the context in which we see ourselves. Only in this context are we able to appropriately prescribe, innovate, and package a financial regime and institution that is responsive to the unique features of finance that is required to sustain the development needs of such an environment. The context, and I prefer to call that a conundrum, because it brings with it a void that is asking to be filled. It brings with it opportunities. It brings with it neither gray nor black, but a very creative response. So it is not entirely cut out, it's not entirely streamlined. We have got to move away from structured finance. We have got to move away from textbook knowledge that we have. We have to move away from supply-driven approaches and innovatively discern, understand, listen, and be able to respond to the needs of such a new environment. So what context are we talking about as we think about investment financing and financial development strategies for the fourth and fifth industrial revolution? When firms are positioning, firms are there to invest. An asset or an item that you acquire in order to grow it, in order to generate return, in order to expand, is an investment. But you need a mechanism to acquire that investment. We live in an era of rising market inequalities and iniquities. We live in an era of markets that bring out very uneven cost structures that firms have got to deal with. We have got a prevalence of subsidies of different forms in different market environments, but also we have an entrenchment of protectionist policies that polarize these markets. We also have very unequal competitiveness and comparative advantages within markets and across borders. We are at a time when we see very glaring mismatch between policy and practice, as well as the evolution of markets that has not really kept pace with the right financial instruments and institutions. It is not unusual to you to hear about an emerging entrepreneurial idea, but which is not finding the right financial instruments and the right financial institutions to address its financing needs. We also have got in our environment soft and hard components of market infrastructure that makes access to markets entirely uneven. Soft attributes of the markets could be policies, could be tariffs, could be barriers, could be information. Physical components of the infrastructure are the physical geographical areas in which the forces of demand and supply converge. It could also be virtual in these days. We have rising unemployment, especially among youth, in the midst of a labor market that is not responsive to address these unemployment issues. It is not that we have no solution at all. The solution is embedded within development finance approaches. The solution is embedded within a very open-minded thought about institutional mechanism to address the glaring challenges we have before our eyes. We also have very robust but inadequately targeted innovations, especially in the IT sector. The Vice Chancellor spoke about this, but which have not adequately achieved market penetration. Is the ICT revolution is the development of apps a response to a need in the market? Is it being aligned to financial evolutions? Furthermore, we now have a recurrence of asymmetric information with respect to both demand and supply sides of financial services. Allow me to recognize that the central bank and policy makers have invested a lot of effort and resources in addressing asymmetric information issues. We will see the significance of asymmetric information when we talk about financial intermediation down the slides. But this asymmetric information has been addressed through the establishment of the Credit Reference Bureau. I've not been privy to evaluations and studies that helps us to have an insight on how much effect this has had in addressing asymmetric information. We also have very inefficient and often distorted value chains with intermittent supply chain glitches. This is largely in most of our productive sectors. And we go into a little detail down the line when we look at the strategies. We have limited and shallow financial markets with limited options for development finance. The financial markets are really places that we can find investable capital. It could be the stock exchanges, it could be equity brokers. These are all forms of finance for investment, but this is very, very deficient in the African landscape, Uganda inclusive. We also have misaligned and institutional infrastructure that do not enhance linkages and production integration. Furthermore, we have inadequate and often ad hoc government public investment coupled with sporadic and unpredictable policy changes that does not simply help in any way the smooth institutional evolution of investment finance and development finance. We have, even to this date, a widespread disinterest in business registration and public listings. Business registration is very important in reducing asymmetric information. It's very important in developing a database that helps a right perception and estimation of the volume, the types, the institutions of financial services that we need. Public listings is very poor, not only in Africa, but in many developing countries. And as a result, we have got very, very constrained access to finance for investment, and we limit the scope of financial development. Last but not least, we also deal with, on a day-to-day basis, financial institutions, types, and financial instruments that are not often aligned to the real investment sectors. So those in agricultural value chains, those in trade and industry, those in artisan and craft, those in intellectual property dealings, those in real estate, are often having to trade a lot of compromise in finding the kind of investment instruments and finance that fit with their strategic investment choices. Having looked at this context, dear audience, I am trying to help you appreciate how we then approach investment finance and then evolve the right development finance strategies that can address our growth responses. In the subsequent slides, I walk you through an overview of these two components of investment finance, and development finance strategies. Later on, I share with you concrete success stories of development finance approaches. But beyond the stories, we also have got tragedies that have arisen even from those success stories. It is from these strategies that I would like to implore the attention of our postgraduate students, that these are areas that we're having to work on, that these tragedies are the triggers that then drive the subsequent development finance strategies of the current and subsequent revolutions. It is testimony to the unpredictable and sporadic evolution of markets and the financial investment strategies that these markets often demand. So we are never done and dusted with what we have. We are always having to align and realign, to innovate, to adjust, to do product development, and try to ensure we have the right interface between available financial institutions, available financial instruments, and the real sector that these finances are having to support. Let me provide now an overview of what the various components that there are embedded in the jargon we call financial development. Financial development has got two components to it, namely the development of financial institutions and then the development of financial markets. Financial institutions are developed along the parameters of depth. In other words, how much liquidity is in that financial institution. This is important as a financial strategy. This is important as a mechanism of financing investments. Development financial institutions must address issues of access. Access is broad. Access can both be physical, access can also be digital. But access can also be looked at in terms of the niche. Do we all, given our various financial preferences, find opportunity to identify and access the correct type of financial institutions that addresses my unique needs? And dear friends, as we think about financial access, look at the economic structure of this country, both in the last 40 years and what it is now. Think about the real sector and think about the availability of financial institutions that helps to address access issues for farmers, for traders, for industrialists, for scientists, for entrepreneurs. This is where the issue of access is. But access is also about the instruments within those institutions. Have we instituted such depth of bureaucracy and red tape and stacks of papers that makes it repulsive for a semi-literate farmer to access services? This is the broad, multifaceted aspect of access. But we also have efficiency. Efficiency, especially in response time, efficiency in terms of cost, and efficiency in terms of addressing the diversified financial needs of the real sector. And last but not least, financial institutions ought to exude stability. Stability of operations, stability of products, stability of spread, and stability in terms of reputation. The other segment of financial development is in the markets. Financial markets have developed from different backgrounds. The American financial markets has evolved largely from the perspective of stock exchanges, equity houses, contrary to perhaps continental Europe that grew most of their financial sector by way of the banks. And for each of these, the embedded attributes remain the same. Has it got the depth, the liquidity that is commensurate with the development needs of that economy? Is it accessible? Are they efficient? And do they have long-term stability? These two colloquias is an embodiment of financial development. I will say a few things about investment financing and very superficially talk about these 4 instruments, but I will not spend a lot of time to elaborate on these instruments. These are various attributes of corporate finance. When we are looking at investment financing, when we are looking at where do we find money to invest, these areas have grave limitations in terms of depth, in terms of tenure, and in terms of adaptability to the context that I earlier shared of the environment in which we are. If we must have medium to long-term sustainable access to investment finance, we have to look to a future of development finance. I will speak in depth about development finance, where my heart is, but that notwithstanding, let's appreciate these sources of investment financing that comes either from your own capital or equity. It could be debt capital that is borrowed from a financial services provider. If you have been in business already, then you have got the luxury of using your retained earnings. It was highlighted in corporate governance. These are the retained earnings. Can we plow it back to bolster expansion, to bolster growth, to refinance our investment needs? This is a luxury of stable, profitable enterprises. But we also have raising investment finance through initial public offerings or listing in the stock exchange. Listing in the stock exchange affords you access to an infinite pool of financial resources for investment. But this is also subject to very rigorous regulatory requirements that you ought to fulfill. IPO is an institution, a commercial entity now going public to sell shares. It is successful. It has got growth needs. It has got sustained and long-term compliance. It is credible. It has a reputation. It is selling a product that has great buy-in. It can appeal through IPO to sell shares to members of the public and use the proceeds of these shares for growth. These 4 sources of investment finance, my friends, are very limited. And for me, this is not the destiny for the next financial revolution. It is not the destiny of sources of investment. It is not the destiny of development finance strategies for the next revolution. I have a deliberate interest and bias towards the unbankable masses at the bottom of the pyramid, the marginalized segments of our community. You would want to call them also active, poor investors, actively poor, economically active poor people at the bottom of the pyramid. This segment have demonstrated lots of reliability, lots of appetite for investment finance, but have not had the opportunity of access to the right financial instruments, to the right financial institutions, and therein should be the focus of our postgraduate students. And any person who is interested in shared prosperity, in equitable economic development, in the well-being of those at the grassroots. The issues of the bottom of the pyramid, for me, is also a matter of national security. If we do not have development cascading by creating opportunities for the grassroots, for those at the bottom of the pyramid, we also risk having sustainable development because you have got one eye that is in tears. So any economic system that is not inclusive, that is not participatory, that does not provide access to development opportunities for the grassroots is one that cannot yet have its cake and eat it. So therein lies the interest of development finance. Therein is the focus that I would like to argue should be the preoccupation of our postgraduate students, so that we are able to align investment opportunities, development strategies to the investment needs of the economically active poor in our community. Our postgraduate students have completed a course in strategic management and strategic leadership. Business intelligence demands that for investment financing and financial development to take the right course, attention is required to address the following areas. These are critical areas that shape the development of financial strategies, that shape stable long-term financial provision. These business intelligence areas must address information gathering. It must address, with this information that they have gathered, must address investment and allocation of funds. It must address monitoring and allocating capital. It must address exerting corporate governance. It must address trading and diversification of risk. Those categories to which this presentation is skewed, the focus at the bottom of the pyramid, also means that we must have appetite for risk that is incidental to that segment of the population. And therefore, with this information, we are able to mobilize and pool savings for intermediation. The earlier sources of finance that we spoke about so far does not provide the depth and variety that development finance strategies for the next industrial revolution requires. Until about 2012, empirical studies show that nearly 70% of savings on the African continent are being held back in informal financial institutions that investment opportunities are not able to access. Only development finance approaches are able to unlock these investment funds and support intermediation of these funds to bring a return to those savings. So Africa as a continent would have actually had much less to borrow to support its development than it is currently borrowing. But we are having to live with this evil because of inadequate financial institution types, as well as financial institution instruments that are able to facilitate the kind of revolution that we are encountering. What then should our development finance strategy address? In this presentation, I argue three important strategies. One, that our financial development strategy must address medium to long-term financing that is in tandem with the real sector financing and growth needs of the economy. And I would like to give you a context. If you are very lucky, corporate finance will give you probably up to 7 years. And many projects are hardly done in 7 years. Think about infrastructure projects. Think about intellectual property rights. Think about an innovation that first has to break even. Think about research and development that has got certainty of market penetration. Think about the ongoing IT innovations. A lot of these have got a substantial payback period. When we think about medium and long-term financing, consider private public property investments. Consider those hard infrastructure, roads, bridges, and the like. Think about the English Channel that took 15 years first to build and another 15 years to operate before it could begin generating the returns it requires to service that investment finance. So clearly, for us to address the very robust, the very aggressive, and very ambitious industrial revolution of the fifth cycle, we have to think about medium to long-term financing that goes way out of the capacity of corporate finance to address. Strategy number 2, we must also think about development finance institutions and instruments that respond to the context of the economy. We all still mourn the collapse of cooperative bank. We all still ask, which banks do we have with products that can finance industrial growth? So we don't have the kind of diversity of financial institutions and instruments that must spur the growth that we need. I have seen government encouraging young people to congregate around skills and so forth, but this intervention falls way short of an institutional approach that has got a refinancing mechanism, a mechanism of monitoring, a mechanism of regulating, and a mechanism of BDS infrastructure to support that industry. The different segments of the economy run along various risk types and therefore different financial approaches. Cooperative Bank had a particular appetite for the risks in the agricultural sector. That risk is not palatable to Stanbic Bank or to Centenary Bank, for instance. So if we do not have the right type of financial institution, we cannot have the kind of financial strategy that addresses the industrial revolution that we are in. Rabobank in the Netherlands is exclusively an agricultural bank. Agricole Credit Finance in France is exclusive for the agricultural sector. They have huge balance sheets in continental Europe and have posted long-term sustainability with infinite access for the agricultural sector entrepreneurs. So this is a thought that goes to actors in this sector, and particularly our preferred audience, the postgraduate students. Thirdly, we must be able to provide medium to long-term financing on a sustainable basis to the real sector. If we have policy stipulations and promulgations that places priorities in area X, and 2 years later, that priority has changed, it affects the incentives that drive financing mechanisms. So when the real sector is antagonized, we affect the provision of these long-term and medium-term financial services. Consequently, if you do not have institutional stability, we jeopardize the evolution of related but different financial institutions that come handy to address our growth needs. Let's say a few contexts of development finance. Development finance, as you have it on your slide, is very much the use of public resources to address private sector investment. Most development finance destination is in low and middle income countries for reasons of poor or inadequate savings mobilization. If we cannot mobilize the requisite savings to intermediate, we cannot meet the financing needs for the fifth industrial revolution. Development finance, therefore, is a strategic intervention that comes very handy to address the unique private sector capital needs for investment. Development finance institutions occupy an intermediary space between what government is able to provide through public finance. It has become a hybrid form of leveraging public aid to support private investment, but also an alternative mechanism as opposed to grants for facilitating international capital flows. They focus on profitable investments. They are very high in their appetite for risk. They are very aligned to market doctrines, and they are a very, very strategic focus in these contemporary times for addressing economic growth and sustainable development. The core mission of development finance is really to address the investment shortfalls, and we are not in lack of shortfalls in addressing the deficiency between commercial investment and state development aid. I give you some highlights of key development finance institutions that have had a particular interest on the African market. The Commonwealth Development Corporation, the Proparco in France, have wide investments in Africa. The FMO is the Dutch Development Finance Institution. You know there are shareholders in Centenary Bank. DEG has transformed over the years, based in Germany. We have the Asian Development Bank. We have the Inter-American Development Bank. We have our own, the African Development Bank, and the European Investment Bank, as well as the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. These are bilateral and regional development finance institutions that have provided incremental portfolios for development finance investment in Africa. The IFC is the development finance arm of the World Bank, and it transmits its resources largely through the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, with which it matches, it provides counterpart funding to interest private capital providers to invest in development finance ventures. These logos that you see on your screen are very much a household logo that you can all relate with. These logos have a narrative that I am delighted to provide because I was party to the various development finance evolutions of these institutions. And herein lies the success stories of development finance strategies, but also the tragedy of paradigm shift. Let me talk a bit about Centenary Bank. Centenary Bank is the brainchild of the Episcopal Conference of Catholic Bishops of Uganda. I was privy to the legal discussions that gave birth to Centenary Bank. The founding mission of Centenary Bank was to address the investment concerns of our people at the bottom of the pyramid. The bishops said, we cannot preach to people who are going hungry. We cannot preach to people who are bare feet. We cannot preach to people who are wearing torn clothes, because the word of God cannot permeate this life and transform it. Can the bank not take an active part in transforming the lives of those at the bottom of the pyramid? By this time, these constituents at the bottom of the pyramid who need development finance, who must be a subject of transformation, who must be a pride of any caring nation, were marginalized by the corporate finance providers that we highlighted earlier. It was therefore a financial innovation and strategy that the Episcopal Conference tasked to the board that they appointed, that we would like you to focus at rural finance. Centenary Bank originally was called Centenary Rural Development Bank, CERUDE. Over the years, it has metamorphosed into Centenary Bank. I need to be helped by our postgraduate students to take this as a study of the notion of mission drift. We need to see if the portfolio of Centenary Bank, when it was Centenary Rural Development Bank then, is still a reflective portfolio that it has today. The Episcopal Conference told them that we would like 70% of the lendings of Centenary Bank to go to those unbanked, those marginalized, economically active poor that are engaging in an income-generating activity to transform their lives, but are not accessing the kind of investment finance that they need. So this is the genesis of Centenary Bank. In 2007, we had the third African Microfinance Conference that was hosted in Uganda for no reason but to come and listen to the testimony of Centenary Bank. That a bank that has got 70% of its portfolio in a risky area that nobody wants to go to, agricultural lending, to groups, to individuals, not firms or institutions, is able to collect over 95% of the loans and plow it back. How have you done it? Now, the revolution that was done in Centenary Bank was to recruit agronomists as loans officers, to recruit forestry professionals as loans officers, to recruit veterinary doctors as loans officers. Because to finance a poultry project, to finance a piggery project, you need to understand the risk from the perspective of a veterinary doctor. So to do that, you had to incorporate that expertise within the bank. The testimonies was that it had never been known that a bank would recruit a veterinary officer as a loans officer. But this is the revolution that we are talking about. Likewise, we had similar experiences in plantation farming, that you had to speak to someone with expertise in plantation financing to be part of the financial development strategy. Over the years, Centenary remains the most ingenious, progressive financial institution because of an approach that was grounded on development finance strategy. The incentive of the Dutch Development Finance Institution to come to the board of Centenary Bank lies in the passion Centenary Bank had in financing those gray areas that nobody wanted to go to. FINCA is another glaring example in our face. An EU-funded organization that was providing refinancing and wholesale credit to microfinance institutions supported FINCA in its transformation. You all recall the beginnings of FINCA until FINCA became a micro deposit taking institution. FINCA was lending to the grassroots. It was non-collateralized lending It was based on social capital. It was addressing financing needs of a growth stage of a community that needed to grow, but could not find finance. So investment finance and development finance strategies became the panacea that brought growth to these institutions and turned around the lives of many at the bottom of the pyramid. We cannot conclude this without talking about the microfinance revolution of Professor Mohammed Yunus. Microfinance for long was rubbished as a non-starter by macroeconomists. But Yunus presents empirical evidence of the kind of response to the fifth industrial revolution that his financial development innovations has been able to address. We all have recollections about Uganda Microfinance Union. Uganda Microfinance Union was one of the successful development finance strategies. It took to lending to middle-income salary earners before it grew to non-collateralized lending to women groups and youth. Here is the conundrum that struck Uganda Microfinance Union. Microfinance Union of Uganda had liquidity challenges. It was no longer able to meet the financing needs of the constituency it stood out to finance. It is part of this growth need arising from the appropriate development finance strategy that provoked the acquisition of Uganda Microfinance Union by Equity Bank. So Equity Bank that we have today is a consequence of responding to unmet needs for investment finance to spur growth at the bottom of the pyramid, an area that traditional investment finance had not been able to address. I served as a consultant in the transformation of an NGO into a for-profit financial services provider because of the growth needs. Kishi Credito, at the bottom right of that slide, is a microfinance institution in Angola. After the war, Angola had to find ways of beginning to address development needs, address poverty, resettle communities, and give them a way to livelihood. We studied ancient practices of very, very crude and agrarian savings collection by women groups in Angola. That was where we anchored our development finance strategy for growing this into a bankable, sustainable financial institution, providing investment needs for those that do not have access to corporate finance. As we speak today, this Kishi Credito, from an NGO that was in only 2 locations in Angola, namely in Luanda and Cabinda, has now 17 branches of financially and operationally sustainable institutions providing appropriate financial services to largely the bottom of the pyramid. However, the tragedy.
Patrick, do you copy?
Yes. Can I finish? Hello? I hear you. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Patrick.
May I continue?
Okay, Patrick.
Yeah.
Sorry for the echo, but we are running out of time. If you can just summarize.
This is the last slide, audience. Let me say a few things about the tragedy of this development finance strategy. The tragedy that I recommend as an area of inquiry and further studies by interested parties, but as well as our postgraduate students, is one of mission drift. Mission drift that is incidental to transformation, mission drift that is incidental to perhaps a new evolution of another industrial phase, is that as soon as these development finance strategies matured to fruition, they fell under the ambits of prudential regulation. Prudential regulation is very intrusive, is very demanding, and requires compliance with very, very high-end rules of the financial sector. The very bottom of the pyramid, the very clientele that grew these institutions, that made these institutions who they are, that could not meet the prerequisites to access financial services in these institutions, now got marginalized by these very financial institutions. Those who had access to tracer studies of Uganda Microfinance Union found complaints of, we are the ones that grew this institution, but it has now left us because we don't have a title with which to borrow money, because we don't have a logbook with which to borrow money, because we don't have the requisites to meet the savings requirements. So this is a tragedy of paradigm shift. It might still be embedded in many of these institutions. And if it is the case, it is then high time for our postgraduate students to now begin the laborious task of rethinking the next financial development strategy. The context that I shared above of the unemployed youth, of various avenues of investment that we see every day, of the various untapped opportunities that we see every day, but they do not have the right financing. What solutions are we able to provide to address these industrial revolutions investment financing needs? Finally, development finance strategies are available for all the critical sectors that drive our economy, that drive our livelihoods, that drive our well-being. Development finance strategies are realized through projects. It is applicable to the energy sector, to all infrastructure projects, to wash projects, crafts and artisans, music, intellectual property, and agro-enterprises. In conclusion, development finance strategy provides unparalleled and unmatched avenues that are able to foster real sector development and wields enormous potential for the next financial and industrial revolution. I thank you for listening, and thank you again and again for the opportunity of making me a part of this inaugural lecture. Thank you. Chair, I am now done. Hello.
Hey, could you confirm if you hear us?
I can now hear you.
Okay, now just it is time for questions now, or appreciation or addition. But it's only 10 minutes, please. Just 10 minutes for everyone for questions and answers. Because already sat for a long time. Okay, anybody? Yes.
Somebody can hear you, just speak loud.
Thank you so much, Mr. Patrick, for the wonderful presentation. I have a question for you.
One is looking at Uganda today, what are the impacts of the mushrooming financial institutions on the grassroots?
Thank you. Any other question? Before just want to mark that one so that you answer them together. Is there another question? Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Officer. I just want to some kind of insight from you about when we see the government initiative, so many partners program, and also people are borrowing money from banks, like finance sources, but we see the business are not doing well, failing. What could be some of the issues surrounding this failing? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I missed the second question. I missed the second question.
I hope you can hear me now. Yes.
Do you copy?
Yes, I hear you.
Right, just in a quick way, I was talking.
You have gone off.
Okay. He will send it in a chat.
Okay.
Okay.
This you can respond to what you want.
There is so much echo there.
Patrick, could you go ahead and respond?
Okay, I missed the second question. I can have it through the chat. But to my sister's question, the impact of mushrooming financial services. The impact of mushrooming financial services poses a great threat to the healthy evolution and growth of the financial sector. This is not the first time it is happening. We saw this at the beginning of the growth of microfinance institutions, where we had cases of multiple borrowing and multiple lending. We had portfolios of financial institutions degenerating significantly, and loans that stood at risk in the whole sector was very, very contagious. And therefore, it's very, very important to uphold the recent interventions of the central bank of financial education, financial literacy. I would like to applaud Charles Abola for extensive write-ups on financial literacy in the media. We need to reach out to our communities. We need to bring financial literacy, financial education to the grassroots, but also to the semi and literate as well, that we ought to understand what our financial consumption needs are and be able to bring these financial needs to the right institution. If we do not do this, we are going to end up in a situation of vicarious liability and loss of assets on the part of the borrowers, but also we could lose potential savings by taking our savings to financial institutions that are not in a good standing. So it is important to develop an attitude of inquiry. We must be inquisitive. We must find out the legal status of a financial institution or a financial services provider. Are they regulated? Are they not regulated? And we need to understand the environment around the operations. We need to ask as much questions about the types of products they offer. We need to read those forms that are dished out to us whenever we are applying for financial services of the various types. So the impact can be grave if we go into accessing these services without an inquisitive mind, without adequate education. The non-performing assets recovery trust in Uganda has documented stacks of loans that have gone bad that could not even be collected because of not only multiple lending, but because we have also not carried out adequate sensitization about financial issues to potential and actual clients of financial services. I have seen more questions coming in. Boniface is asking, in recent years, we have seen the growth of SACCOs and VSLA, which have become the beacon of hope for most people. We have also seen the microfinance support center lending to such associations. These associations have a governance structure. They are registered. These registration certificates hang on the walls of the offices of these organizations. We must pay attention to the validity of their registration, to the validity of their operating license. We must also carry out financial intelligence by asking the apex institutions that are responsible for supervision of these various types of financial institutions. I've seen a question on marketing. Marketing is the biggest challenge, not finance. What is your take? Partly yes, partly no. Either way, marketing can also be misleading. I would rather take sensitization. We must have a mind that is suspicious. We must carry an inquisitive mind. Marketing will not go further than getting you excited and buy the next product. Not many providers will tell you the adverse sides of the product that they're selling. So do not be lured into buying a product by having, a very spicy presentation that appeals to your emotions. Question every product that is marketed to you. Ask, there are no silly questions, question these financial services providers. Where is the link between the Uganda Development Bank and Microfinance Support Center? Uganda Development Bank is a tier 1 development finance institution. Microfinance Support Center is not a regulated financial services provider. Microfinance Support Center is a government parastatal that is simply supporting some of the initiatives of government to support small micro entrepreneurs. What could be the role of VSLAs in bridging their limited capital to investment financing? I really would like to applaud the evolution of financial services in the form of VSLAs. VSLAs are a very welcome intervention that provide an entity in the broader hierarchy of financial services providers. You notice that VSLAs are member-based, they're self-regulated, the members borrow and lend within themselves. It's a mechanism of addressing local financial needs. So it is one of the ingredients that fits in a jigsaw pattern with the evolution of responsive financial institutions. If it has a correct operational mechanism, the members actually self-select themselves. That means there is what we call social capital. So these members are able to manage their cash flow needs, their short-term financing needs, and it saves them from paying a cost that they would pay for financial services that are obtained from the market providers. So this is one of the financial evolutions that is a local initiative of actors realizing their financial needs, defining what they want, and defining the boundaries of their financial needs. It ties in with the notion of area-based cooperatives. Farmers can also congregate around crop enterprise value chains, around income-generating activities. Some mechanism of financing for some of their finance needs can be addressed from their own savings. The issue is about the security of their savings. The issue is about the safety of their deposits, and it is advisable that such local innovations of addressing financial services must have a threshold to take care of security issues, because the VSLs do not have insurance policies to cover the risks that their savings are exposed to. So this is a very welcome initiative that should also grow. Thank you, Mr. Patrick, for the presentation. Question is, seeing government channeling funds into different development programs but failing, and individual businesses also failing, what could be some of the reasons surrounding these failures? This is a question I look forward to. I am one person who is very, very strongly opposed to the mechanism that government is deploying to channeling investment funds. Countries protect their economic growth by supporting sustainable financial institutions through policy frameworks, through regulatory mechanisms, and through respecting the way those institutions work. Channeling investment resources through pathways that bypass financial institutions that are recognized, that are formal, is a contravention of the very doctrine of organic and generic evolution of development finance institutions. It is self-defeating for government to do that. It's one thing I would never recommend. It's one thing that I condemn. It is not healthy, and we have seen it fail from time to time. So all these practices that you're all witnesses to, right from rural microfinance support project down to call it Entandikwa, call it Bonabagagawale, call it youth livelihood funds, call it Emyoga, call it women something, for me, it's not the right path to development finance strategies. We must allow institutions to evolve. We must allow space for the private sector to evolve. We must allow professional institutions manage the growth needs of our country. It is not right to bypass established development finance institutions to spur growth, because those institutions have within them the competence, the instruments, and the strategic direction to sustain, to support, and spur economic development in a sustainable manner, so that when governments change, regardless of who comes to leadership, development financial institutions must be insulated from adverse influence of the political leadership of a country. Only in this way can we post sustainable economic development in even markets that play based on rules. If we do not have this, we're encouraging distortions, we're encouraging undulations in the labor markets, in the service arena, and consequently, we do not have a healthy competitive environment that provides equal opportunities for competition and growth. And this is particularly the pitfall that this country is seeing, because we have created the imperfections in the market. If we have unstructured interventions in the market, in the real sector, by unfettered hands from politicians and government, we adulterate the real economic sector, and we cannot achieve shared equitable growth and equal competition by firms.
So let us, before we start the next section, can we stretch up just an so just okay, let's have a second. Very question. That's a big question. And not consider that the last session is not of important, because if you don't monitor, if you don't evaluate, you are able to do. You have to monitor, you have to work. So that's why that where are we going? I know anyway, ladies and gentlemen, our next presenter is Mr. over 10 years of experience in research.
There seems to be a device that is on. If you have yours, please.
He has over 10 years of experience in research, monitoring, evaluation, and management science, and resilience measurements for building, marketing.
oftentimes when you can have them work, it could be in different. High program money. What's expectations of the ground have? So things with those skills and competences are very, very important in order for you to do or set up a good payment system. You definitely need technical assistance. Some functions or some skills may not be existent among the team. Is there a way you can outsource those functions, either from headquarters or from other external service providers who can provide those in a more rich way? Technology has been the key conversation since morning. And I want to re-echo that technology today is revolutionizing and very fast. Many of us start with technology and they move into the conception or the thinking part. And some of us move from the conception and the thinking and the design of M&E framework, and then begin learning technologies enough to be able to address that. But I will tell you that the huge part of this technology addresses this 1% of the people. You don't need to start with technology. Have the framework, have the concept, know what you want. Be that critical thinker, be that curious person. You design something that technology can only come and enhance what you want to do. Of course, there are enabling environments. We have donor requirements. People will give you the funding to do whatever project you have to do. Be it a government, be it private funders, and other donor-related aspects. They have guidelines that you have to follow for you to be able to meet the requirements. We have things to do with organizational culture. If you don't have the culture within the organization itself that embraces learning, that embraces questioning logics, that embraces failure, saying no, failing doesn't mean you don't achieve whatever you achieve. Fail, learn from it, and do it better. Leadership by we talk about strategic leadership. If you are in an organization and institution that the leaders from country level to whichever level we look at do not see M&E as something very important. Even when you think about the learning from the data, definitely nothing good will come out of it. Of course, there are other aspects of the stereotypes and all that. But in the core of that is what I think, for me, from my experience, so many people oftentimes dive into the core that they think about M&E and they forget about all these other supporting functions and the enabling environment. We shall talk about the core a little bit now when we talk about the demand for data and stuff like that. Of course, all these different key pieces, all these different key pieces, the supporting function is what we're talking about. How do you ensure that you're establishing all the key essentials in order for you to set up a good M&E system? And of course, we have the different sustainable element that is to do with the enabling environment that will make you achieve whatever you look at, and the core in relation to the demand and something like data, but also the different technology that supports those processes. Next slide. Now, when we go into the core, an M&E system should really connect the data demand and supply. When we talk about the demand for data, there are quite many things, right? If you are a project person, you're looking at your indicator plan, or you're looking at the indicators themselves. But then from logic perspective, because you want to test your theory of change, your hypothesis. Now, as researchers, you could probably be working on your thesis or your papers, right? Your research paper. The hypothesis you want to test is what is trying to ask you, what do you want to know? What do you need to know? Right? What do you want to prove? So that's also an area that helps identify the demand. And of course, some of those things include some critical assumptions, the risks that you want to try to learn from. And then the supply side is really when we're now talking about the reports, the dashboards, the analytics that can now tell you the story behind the data or make it different. In reality, data collection is often very different from what is actually needed. And so it's very, very important when we're going to talk to the core. Of course, DQA is more relating to within the data cycle processes. We need to ensure that the data quality is very paramount, holding a different accountability and all that. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about the core, which is the data cycle. And this is really, for me, it's something that I've really felt quite a lot missing.
So we see from number 1 to number 9. There's not any kind of logical sequence to that. But I want to first say that a lot of times people concentrate from number 2. Once you talk about M&E, people start thinking about, oh, we need to develop a data collection. Without thinking about, let's conceptualize this. Let's think about what is the data that we need to make the decision we want. What are the kinds of questions we want to ask in order to help us elicit the kind of information that is relevant either for the design or for whatever adaptation we need. And this is where oftentimes we fight in terms of roles in this. M&E would be saying, oh, the program people will say, can M&E people sit and talk about what are they going to develop? Are they the right people? Are they the users of the information? When you think about the users of it, it could be the technical people who actually need this information to make those informed decisions. M&E can just sit and create you energy, but when the information comes, is it what you need? So this is where number 1 becomes very, very important. I'll unpack that in the next slide. And then there's this last part, the 9 and the 8, which is talking about sharing and analyzing data, learning and documenting and adapting from the data. Now, this is where a lot of times we have a lot of data. People who are very smart with different platforms like using Power BI, Tableau, R projects, very good at those things. But if you miss those initial steps of identifying the data demand and conceptualizing what you actually need, by the time you get to the point of sharing the information, interpreting the information in order to make use of the information, there's going to be a lot of contention. Oftentimes, you sit with people, the researcher or whoever consultant has done evaluation and presented data, and everyone saying, no, this is not a reflection of what we know about. It is because we do not agree right from the beginning on what kind of information we want to know. How do we present that information? Okay, so the users have to be involved in this key process. Where M&E takes lead and key functions around that are really from number 2, where now you can develop the tool. Once you're going to develop the tool, you can set it up on Honor, Coco, Home Care, name all those different technology things, which is your technical comfort. You can do that. Manage the data collection, train the enumerators, but in some stages you need the technical people to come and interpret, because when you're using an external person, the information you're going to gather is not going to be used if it's based on requirement. So it's very essential for us to understand that number 1, and when it comes to identifying the demand for data, it's very important. When it comes to the learning and sharing of the information, it's critical that we involve the users of it. Of course, I've just highlighted that to this point here. All right. Now, to unpack what we're talking about, identifying the demand for data. There are lots of frameworks out there. USA, different donors have different perspective. But today we're seeing that there's much more than just looking at the 3 R's, which I may call right data, right timing, right decision. What was missing in this framework was really the right question. Think about, first of all, what is the right question? Think about those high-level questions you want. What part of the intervention you want to be able to roll out from? If it's about income, you're trying to test some assumptions whether change in income or increase in income does necessarily translate into improved well-being or well-being outcomes. Is that true? When you look at income data, it may tell you this, but when you look at other sort of data, it tells you something else. Asking the right questions before you even think about going to develop the tools to collect the right data. So the right data is really those variables. Now, think about those variables. I mean, from a research perspective, you have a questionnaire. I've seen cases where reports have been presented and the entire question in the tool has been presented in the report. Then I'm like, where do we find that key information that we want to use to make this? What are those relationships we want to see in the data? So the right data is really the question to do with them. Of all these questions you ask, some of them are noise. How do you filter the noise from the data, which is what we're calling nice to know, right? To go into what you need to know in order to make those information. So the right data is really looking at what information do we need in order to be able to answer the question that you want. The timing is very important. How often do you need to collect to be able to learn from whatever you want? And of course, beyond that, when it gets to the learning and making decisions, you need to think ahead of that. What do you want? What kind of decisions do you want to make from the data or from the question you're asking? So basically, what potential changes and adaptations do you want to make based on the data you're collecting? You think about this even before you go into the data. So this is where we oftentimes run those risks where we've seen in practitioners field. Many people just run straight into the data. They forget about this sort of concept. Very, very important in making sure data integrity is maximized. Of course, we have people who are very excited going into those different gates of analysis, but beyond that also you need to prepare an analysis plan which will help you frame those key processes in terms of making decisions. Visualization could be other enhancement, interactive map, those who are good with GIS, playing with data, layering different data to tell the story behind whatever you want to look at. And other things around interpretations are also makes sense. Now, what does that mean when we're talking about demand? Yes, conceptualize and everything. It is a process. It is something that does not have a very standard formula. Learning starts right from the design. When the proposals are being designed, I've had cases where people in a local context begin saying, oh no, the people who develop these proposals are foreign. They don't understand the context. There are always design and redesign phrases and processes. You've developed a proposal 2 years ago and you didn't find a year or two after. The context has changed. What is in the proposal is totally different from what the current context is, right? So learning is a cycle that you have to look at it from a very specific dimension. So one of the key areas, look at experience. The experience is the starting point, basically. You take an action to trigger whatever change you want to look at, okay? And then from the action, you could just keep on playing with the slides. From the action, you have to analyze the action. And this is where a lot of times many people concentrate. They do a lot of descriptive analysis, diagnosing what the issue, what happened, where, and when. Look at the data and you run through it and you'll be able to make those analyses. But we don't go beyond that. We most times fail to do the inference, when it gets to the inferences, why? Ask those why questions. Why am I seeing what I'm seeing? Beginning to tell the story behind the data, behind the numbers and so on. Could it be that something would have been done differently? Ask me those questions based on the information you see. That's when you're making inference. You're trying to diagnose what is the logic or the reason behind the numbers before you can draw any sort of conclusion and make predictions, right? And of course, everything that you learn from the data, it's only when you take action, when you apply whatever you learn into the next course of your action, that's when adaptive management, or that's when you have made adaptation. And that's when we say you have learned from the data. If you've just seen from the different descriptions, there are a lot of those phases. Okay, let's take it a little bit just to a simple aspect. You have a project, and that project is what I'm calling, in that you have a piece of intervention, right? In that piece of intervention, you have what they call, you're going to do your activities. Activities, you have to gauge it based on what are those different types of activities, interventions, and what is the level of effort that needs to go into that activity, and the quality of delivering that activity in order to generate the type of results and the quality of results you want to see. It's very, very important. So this is just a simple theory or logic you want to kind of take. But remember, it's not just A leads to B. Certain circumstances may interfere with what the result we expected to see, right? And those are the circumstances that could actually change your learning dimension. That's what I'm doing. Critical assumptions. All those assumptions that actually realize the result. So it's when those things happen, you should be able to ask yourself, so what is this happening? And if not, how can we modify the type of intervention in order to see the result we hope to see? So this is just a simple theory for you to just look at how you question this thing. And this will not come from academic. This actually is a framework that talks about the person who starts the implementation, whoever is implementing an intervention should be able to question that on your own, right? Now, learning in itself has levels. It has levels when we look at it from an M&E perspective. Assume this green logic is your project cycle. You have a vision or the goal of the program, your field of change or the logic you want to test, long-term strategies and the designs and different interventions you want to implement. You plan, do your work planning, implement, you see your output, your outcome, you impact. Just a simple, assume that's a simple project cycle. Now, the first area of learning oftentimes is like planning and implementation, where you then begin to talk about your tangible real level. You're supposed to do a training, how many did you train? You're supposed to construct some infrastructure, how many did you construct? Simple, right? But can that tell you much about what you want to know, right? Again, look at your work plan. Are you against your targets, against your actual? Are you progressing? Are you meeting those 1 by 1%? Simple kind of thing. Question the quality of the training you did, right? Simple. And this is where the first level of learning is where we normally do a lot of work to capture outputs. Just simple numbers, right? And this is what most donors or most people are happy about. But if you're talking about learning, that's just the first level of learning. It's important. I'm not saying it's not important. It's important that you need to question those particular cases. And most times, whatever you're drawing from the monitoring data is really to help you make practical adjustments or modifications in your planning process. The second level of learning is now where you go a bit more to kind of question, why am I seeing this data? You want to look at, if you've done the training, it's beyond the training, beyond whoever sees the training, you want to look at applications of knowledge, but also the outcome of what is coming out from the knowledge from the people involved. We do some evaluation to kind of, explore other sort of outcome or behavior change, or the different practices that people are doing, or if there's a change in household, let's say well-being outcome, growth in maybe business, profits, and all those kinds of things. We try to be a bit more outcome-oriented analysis. Now, that kind of information you're gathering from that is to help you make those strategic decisions, those strategic modifications, which again will make you modify your design, your intervention. What are you doing? How are you doing? Now, for those that require some people to do a bit of scientific sort of, analysis, some people go and do some of those impact evaluations using randomized control trials. Maybe you employ some of those kinds of factors that you want to see based on the intervention of it, and those who do not receive the intervention, what could be the contribution of our intervention? What could have happened based on our intervention? So this is a bit more rigorous level, and those kinds of things don't come so often. It's a bit more of a long time period if you're doing kind of a 5-year program and all that. And this is where you actually make major significant shifts in your conceptual or theory change. And that's what you really do. But learning again, looking at all those 3 different kinds of data is what we call it generated learning. Remember, validating all these different information are very essential. You cannot just speak confidently based on only your monitoring data. You have to go an extra step to look at what are the outcomes of it. What are the other external knowledge that exists about what you're trying to do, right? Look for these kind of sources. There are so many researches that have been done in those different fields of area. Look at how that validates the information you gathered, and only then, with that combination, that becomes body of knowledge. That same body of knowledge becomes available to our user who will be able to use to make those informed decisions, either in strategies or their conceptual designs or their decisions. So that's where a lot of people most times concentrate, and we forget about that. And if many people do that, oftentimes forget about it. So with this in mind, I just want to say that you don't have to rush the data before you think about it. Think about the concept, the framework, and there are so many different frameworks, resources out there when you're talking about learning. I don't want to crucify me to say that this is the only aspect. You could look at different resources that actually tries to provide you different insights. But what I kind of shared with you is more like really, regardless of whatever you're doing, whether you're doing it in an emergency program or you're doing it in a development long-term kind of program, the basic principles apply. You cannot escape the basic principles. That's what you should do.
This is something for us. It has really finished. And now, if you have some questions, we have 10 minutes. Yes, in very precise. Some might have said very, very fast. Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much for this very The one decision makers really require is information and not data. Very often, the technical people present data rather than information. So I think it should be, we should make it very clear the difference in data and information. It is the meaning that we derive from the set of data that constitutes information. And it is the information that we use for this one. So it is essential, as you said, to first of all understand exactly what the issue is that we want to address. And therefore, what sort of information. And from there, once you have the information demand, then the technical people will map out the kind of data they should collect, the kind of processing they should do in order to generate the required information. Then they present the information to the user. Sometimes I really get amused, especially say on methodological information. What they do, they present methodological data. They say the rainfall is so much. Now imagine somebody in a rural farm. If you say it is so many millimeters, that's the thing. Does it make sense to that person? And does it say this is enough to grow maize or to grow beans? That's just a set of data. So I think it's essential to emphasize that whatever we do should be generating the correct information. I think why some this one maker said, I have not seen, this is not what we require. It's because they presented the data rather than information.
Thank you very much. That is really contribution to this and clarify a lot of things that were said, but in addition, clarifies more. So I don't think we have to respond. Now, somebody else to share, of course, we are dealing with also somebody who has been really correcting that. So, there is nothing there. Yes, there's one there. Because if this connected to see this, presentations are low. I'll give you the summary when we are going to see how we connect. Any other? Okay.
There's a question on the board.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. David. Both project and M&E have plans. How do we ensure that? How do we ensure the two do not override? Plans and M&E. How do we ensure they don't override? Projects and M&E. Yeah.
So where does it?
Both projects and M&E have plans.
Where does he had ways so he'll come.
I think they may need to see him. To come.
So I hope I get the question right in terms of when they say project plan. Are they meaning to do with the work plan and the project? Because at the planning stage, you have the work plan, the detailed implementation plan of the project, which in the detailed implementation plan of the project, you also have M&E activities, key M&E deliverables that you have to be able to monitor the project. But also that key M&E deliverables, you can be able to unpack it and have a more detailed and robust M&E work plan. But when we're talking about the M&E plan in itself, it emanates from the project design itself. M&E plan would be basically the summary of describing for you what the project is about, what the project expects to achieve, and how you expect to monitor and evaluate the project and learn from the project. The two are inseparable. The two are inseparable. You have to look at them right from the same lens. So I think, yeah, that's what I can say. The two projects, whether project plan or project design, you cannot separate it from the M&E plan. It is the M&E actually is part and parcel of the project plan itself.
Thank you so much, Mr. David. I just want to ask the layman's question. Do you people also have people regulate or would you follow up, find out whether the result of the MOU is correct or not? Because we have had incidents of NGOs coming out with reports about their intervention, and sometimes those reports do not reflect after what is on ground. We even had cases of government officials reporting that we have done this, there is this intervention and all that. There is a lot of transformation, but when other people come to really monitor on ground, we find that those things do not even exist. There is no transformation, or those results are not really right.
No, I think your question already, a lot of conversation happened around integrity, but also accountability from an accountability perspective. Donors or whoever gives the money, be it the government or foreign donor or private donor, they have systems in place, or they have requirements oftentimes. But again, whoever is doing so, what is the level of integrity and honesty? Does that person have a good understanding of what is being implemented here at the moment? But when it comes to the implementer's point of view, yes, this is a practice that I cannot say that is not happening. We know these things are happening, where organizations actually cook data, cook data either to make themselves speak good when they have mismanaged the money. So, and this is very important. That's why if you have a good M&E system and people with integrity and good understanding and leadership within such kind of an institution, then when it comes to issues of abusing data and using data for corrupt reasons, just to tell you, some agencies use that to just spread good names about the agency, right? But I think there's a lot of factors that kind of can play within that. And it's something that only if you have, there are some funders who are very strict. Like for instance, if you work with USAID, I think USAID funding, they do what they call data quality assessment. And they either, depending on the length of the program, quarterly, annually, they come to check. If you're saying we reached out to, you've been able to train 1,000 smallholder farmers in the community, it's not just about you giving them the number. They want to see where is the list of the people, and you're not going to tell them this because they will have to go and verify and speak with the respective people. So there are systems in place, but sometimes some of those systems are not taken seriously. And some agencies within their own system also have those quality check requirements. Very important to set up standard operating procedures and quality check at the implementation phase of it, so that you don't wait until program ends and then go to check and then see the perspective of fallen down, or you are planning a tile roof and then you see the gas touch. Those things happen. Yeah. So the integrity is very, very important. And then of course all the accountable different.
What I want to help.
Yes.
Okay. You asked whether there is an institution that supports. I served on the board of the Uganda Evaluation Association for 6 years. So there is an institution. The only problem is that lacks the right. Why? You notice that the architects are well regulated. If you make a mistake, your license is withdrawn. The engineers are regulated because they are acts the parliament that provides that. I mentioned earlier in my presentation that even the corporate governance area is now moving. So hopefully going forward, there should be, once the evaluation association succeeds in getting an act, then there certainly should be a window for regulating the conduct of the evaluation. But allow me to say, and I think you saw it, in the past we talked about monitoring, and we left out a key component which is now become part of the normal nomenclature, the learning. Now, if your motive, and this is tied to the motive of the organization of the institution conducting monitoring has been done as a formality. Yes, it's part of the project design, we've got to monitor, maybe and evaluate at the end of the project, but people do it as a formality. But And so there's been that side. And then there are others who have done it for accountability. The donors usually do it for accountability. To check if the resources they gave you have actually yielded the results that you set out and you committed yourself to deliver. But increasingly, donors and institutions that are forward-looking, Vice Chancellor mentioned, if you're looking, have now embraced the learning dimension or objective of monitoring and evaluation. But we are not doing it as a formality. We are not doing it for accountability, but we want to learn from how we did it in order to improve the way we do it. So there is that side too that now has got to be emphasized. If it's accountability, I can tell you those are the going to work down. You know that what you're talking about will obviously happen. So just that's the bit that I could share.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. Thanks for your presentation. My question I'll ask, it's kind of tied to the program, the postgraduate students here. We have a program called, it's a postgraduate diploma in business intelligence and data analytics. So far we've realized that the biggest number of applicants have an M&E background. My experience has also shown that when they come to this program, they are very interested, mainly interested in the data analytics bit of it. But your presentation shows us that it actually starts before. Actually, look at the data analysis is just one part. That it's important for you to have a background and understand what you're doing or where you're heading to. And we have a component of that. So my question is, could this be an opportunity for you to let even our students who are enrolling and those graduating understand that I know you've already done that, but emphasizing on this. That's my perspective. And the second question, what have been the gaps we've seen? We handle so many of them, and we are realizing so many, almost everyone wants to go and do M&E at the postgraduate diploma level, but I'm sure there are gaps we still see in these people. What are some of them that you've seen over your years of experience that maybe you could help advise those who are entering into the profession? Thank you.
Well, I think this is a very, for me, this is part of the thing that when you see me speak from M&E, I speak with the passion, driven by the passion. And many people are actually coming to this industry because they say it's very attractive, because of money, it pays well. We think about the money part, we forget about so many things. I personally, I told you that I didn't do any M&E course. I did not go for any institution to learn for M&E. I think I see M&E differently. I see that curious mind, that critical thinking, and being able to understand that field of knowledge I want to be able to do. Using that from my background, of course, I'm a demographer, a lot of statistics, a lot of analysis, but that was not good enough to set me to be able to be an M&E. I personally think M&E as a course unit within my course was one of the courses that I dreaded the most, because I totally did not understand what exactly. But over time, as I began doing a lot more research during my graduate study, I appreciated it a lot more because I started thinking more beyond just the course in itself, starting to look at challenges that we see in the day-to-day world that we live in. You see somebody eating food, let's say around the gutter, buying food from around those local kiosks and all that is on the gutter, and then you begin understanding, like you start questioning, why could this person be doing this? What could be the reason why this person is actually all these things? So that motivation and inspiration came from way beyond just thinking about, I need to go in because it's money, passion, and inspiration, and knowing what you're about. And it took me time to basically be able to come to M&E. When I finished my graduate studies, I spent 6 months just reflecting what do I really want to do. Should I go back to school and do my PhD? Should I be able to just get into academia and get some lecturing or teaching job? Or what do I really want to do? And I think that sort of time reflection was very helpful for me, pause and reflect and say, I think this is what I want. And I think my first job was as an M&E officer. I came in with a master's of philosophy degree, but I went as an M&E officer because I had to humble myself. I knew I was more into the research, academia, so I needed to kind of humble myself and say, what does it look like in the practitioner? balancing, finding that balance took me time. I could look at everything that these people who already been in NGOs doing these things, and I was like, what are they even trying to do? Because I was looking at it from only one lens. So I think it's really a question to do with what really we want to be able to do. And so I see a lot of people plugging into M&M courses, but when job applications come in, many of them are still they're not fully reflected on why they actually, because they just saw maybe doing data gigs, using those Power BI is so fun. Let me just go and learn it for 2 months or 3 months, and then I say I want to do M&M. I think you need to take time back on yourself. What do you want? What are you good at? What is it that you think you can offer in that industry? And how much can you give yourself or push yourself beyond what you learn from class? You have to learn more. I have to build a network of expertise, different people learn from, be able to make who I am. So it was a long journey, I must say that. The first question,
which is on the focus on more, actually, we realize our students are very interested in it, so that they will attempt to not miss any data analytics related class, and they'll leave out the others that are very important supportive.
Yeah, I think, just like I mentioned, I think there's a lot of selling market. People who are using all these technologies, they see them as very attractive in the industry because they feel that's really the heart. But I told you, like I presented here, you could go there, but you're going to fail. You have to think about the conceptualization. Everything you're going to go into, take a little step back and look at the framework before you go into analytics. You could have a very good data, but if you don't understand the background, the processes, the design, all those things, the data you're going to generate, whether you have the best way of presenting the data with different technology application or just analytics. If you cannot do that, then I think you're missing the point. So I think it's very important to find that balance. To not just rush into the analytics part of it. It's amazing, it's exciting, that's what everyone would love. But I think take that step back and take a little bit and look at the framework, concept, the designs, and that will make it more grounded as we move forward.
Chair, with your permission, there's a hand up and there's a question in the chat. Okay. Two questions?
Yes, I have a question, Mr. Otim. I am very, very overwhelmingly moved by a very articulate presentation by our colleague. And in expressing my appreciation, it has stimulated a lot of reflections in my mind. We are a young and learning university, and we are blessed with diverse expertise there. When I think about Mr. Lamto, when I think about the Vice Chancellor, when I think about a lot of you there, I find that it is fitting to even demand more. Can this precedent that you have set of this inaugural lecture now be a foundation that we should sustain by way of plowing back the outcomes of monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning into our own strand of continuing professional education, so that we have a semblance of this similar platform that we can use to evolve improvements to our academic offerings, but also evolve this into a platform for engaging our students and calling them back to inflame their professional practices with what the university has gathered from our environment and from learning platforms. I really would like to put this to the audience and to the leadership of the university, that we should think about a continuing professional development that is shaped with a content that is informed by ongoing and sustained institutionalized ME and L practices. Thank you. Robin, was I heard?
Yes, we had you on this side.
Okay, good. Thank you.
food security, economic growth, and the whole concept of, access to finance, whatever, multiple sectors. Now you realize that 5% M&E looking at the human resource needs, the skills, the different skill sets within the team. If you are going to do a research within the program, some research requires really very enormous, the kind of questions or the kind of learning you want to use different avenues. So the budget has to actually need to be able to match the scope of the program in order for you to be able to learn better. But we've seen most times people don't pay more attention on the M&E budget because they feel it's not something important. Until they fall into trap, then they realize actually they need it to have done better. But we're seeing a growing trajectory. People are really beginning to embrace and to appreciate the importance of M&E because again, it's also shifted from the traditional audit-looking type of M&E to what Mr. Charles mentioned, that we're moving more towards learning. We want to be able to learn from whatever we're doing, make those changes. When it comes to those standards, I would say those standards are there. Their standards are there. To what extent are we actually utilizing those standards, applying it and making it be very intentional and deliberate? The DCE standards, very available, OECD, the DAC standards. USAID has, if you implement the USAID program, you know USAID is one of the most very refined donor when it comes to M&E standards. Agencies are also going in now to begin actually refining and strengthening their own standards that aligns with different funding opportunities. And I assume, like for instance, the government of Uganda also has a system in place, or standards in place, but to what extent is it implemented? Follow those standards, make sure those standards are implemented. But I think it's there. It's just a question of knowing where they are and how to be able to apply it. Okay.
We are very much appreciative. We are friends who have sat here since morning. What did you hear? And then I will give you some people in the first presentation. Summary was that the industrial revolution from that time to now has shaped the lives of the people. The thinking of the people, where we communicate, and it is shaping business. That's why your business is online. At the same time, it also connects us. That's why there are people who are not here, but we can hear, and they can present from very far. Most important thing is, no matter what the revolution, we must not lose focus of the human being. the human. That is presentation. Presentation 2 was about governance. The whole idea of governance, it must be based on ethics, ethical values. And it must also be based on integrity and transparency. That's what government is. We had the third presentation, whereby things which are clear is financial investments and others must first respect the rules of operation. Must be. And they must follow good practices. Is where you have that people can be cheated and get the form in the field, but they are legal charges standard. So, any investment therefore must be inclusive. And this inclusivity, that was the result of Centenary Banks, because they did that. Yeah, more people will just send me, you know, so that is that one is pretty long. For every people, then timing is also find out the context. Some people and the facts are not very. So this is something we can remember, and then as the gentle lady has said, you can take all the notes or all the presentation, because they are very important. Academic this university, and before I go, I get into all of these things for the whole of their presentation. That's what we do after we finish. You have to push and see what you use the slide. Slide is one of the so I really do appreciate them and we clap for them. And surely let us thank very much our inaugural chef, who was the first, our DBC. Thank you very much. In conclusion, there is the last part where I also is coming to make a statement. DC, whether it's right or you for the but thank you.
Afternoon again. I know we are all tired and probably hungry. I will make this brief. In a special way, I would like to thank our panelists for tonight. Thank you very much, Charles. This has been life-changing. Thank you very much, David. I really appreciate it. Please allow me to refer to you by your first name. Patrick, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being part of the inaugural public lecture at this university. As Faculty of Management Science, that was at the background preparing this, we are committing ourselves to make this an annual event if the university will permit. We also hope that you will always accept to come and continue sharing what you just shared with us today. This has been so mind-opening. I have so much notes that I don't even know what time I'll read. I will not go much into the details. I will request DBC, who will in turn invite the Vice Chancellor, who is our Chief Host, come and officially
close the event. Thank you very much. Mr. Lamton,
very much, ladies and gentlemen, and all the participants for persevering, for your dedication to be with us here since early morning. You have been very attentive, and your contributions to this conference have been excellent and excelling. I want to thank the organizers for doing all of this within a very short period of time, and the university as a whole, and above all our panelists for these eloquent presentations, which has really educated us. At this moment, my job is very simple. I have the great honor and pleasure to invite the Vice Chancellor to come and give a closing remark on this. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. This is one of those days which must go in the history of our institution, in which we have organized a public lecture, not only for the benefit of our students, but also for the benefit of other people who are interested in the general public. This is what it means to be an academic institution, because the things that we teach, the learnings we get in the classroom, is not purely academic. It's something that is relevant and relates to what practitioners do. And so while it can be nice to pontificate as academicians on our academic fronts, the meaning of our academic fronts is the validation that happens when practitioners confirm the things that we teach. And so I want to thank very much the Dean and the faculty of management science for organizing this. I want to thank the participants, the facilitators, the presenters who accepted to be part of this and all who contributed to this organization. I think as University Secretariat, I think we should be the beginning, and our participation and engagement in sharing our intellectual competence to the general public should be an ongoing thing, and not just a one-time thing. So this becomes a challenge to us and all our academic units to see how we can draw together people, because the things we teach are things of interest. The things we teach in all our faculties are things of interest, which we should be able to bring together people and say, yeah, these are the critical issues we are experiencing today, and we are the thinkers about these issues, and let us reflect about them. This in part relates to one of the observations that one of the presenters, but at that time was speaking as a respondent about our work in shaping lives of the people here. And so I think this is one of those forums in which we can generate interest, we can generate discussions, and so draw also interest of other stakeholders, which how we can be of help to our people. So I'm very grateful that we have done this, and I thank you all for being part of it. A special thank you to our students, the postgraduate students, who have a small component to complete the requirements for their programs. First of all, for believing in us and for being part of this journey together with us. And through you, you have also opened doors to others. And so I thank you very much. And those who have given time to join us digitally from different places, I'm also aware that some did not stay for the whole time, but have been able to attend maybe one part or the other. It's all part of the show, so very people we are grateful. As University Secretariat, we are here to serve. We are grateful that we are part of this event. I will now conclude this. Shall conclude with a prayer and a blessing. Let us rise. We have our institution prayer which reminds us that all we do is in service. It challenges us to see every human being as the presence of God whom we serve in love, in the example of the heart of Christ. And so we pray in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. O Sacred Heart of Jesus, filled with immense love, broken by our ingratitude, and pierced by our sins, yet loving us still. Accept the consecration we make to you of all that we are and all that we have. Through me, may everyone amid this day see you, Lord. Feel your presence. Experience your love. May I serve you by serving others in your name. Making all that I do gift of love and end. Lord be with you. Mighty God, bless the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. You are dismissed with grace.